The report arrived in Tokyo on a routine intelligence summary. 12 pages, standard format, sourced from naval attachés and operatives monitoring American industrial activity. The data described production projections that seemed designed to intimidate rather than inform. December 1942. Tokyo, Japan. American factories, according to these intelligence estimates, were preparing to manufacture aircraft at rates that defied established manufacturing doctrine. Not dozens per month. Not hundreds. The projections suggested daily production approaching 300 aircraft across all American facilities combined. 300 complete military aircraft, every single day. Each one requiring engines, instruments, armament systems, communications equipment. The officers reviewing the intelligence in Tokyo's Navy Ministry had spent careers understanding what modern warfare demanded. They knew aircraft production. Japan's own factories operated at maximum sustainable capacity, producing roughly 2,000 aircraft monthly through coordinated effort across dozens of specialized facilities. That represented the ceiling of what organized industrial society could achieve when fully mobilized for war. The American projection suggested something beyond that ceiling. Lieutenant Commander Nakajima set the report aside with the others. His responsibility involved tracking Allied industrial capabilities to inform operational planning. The intelligence data flowed continuously: shipping movements, factory construction, resource allocation patterns. Most of it confirmed expectations. Occasionally, reports arrived that seemed disconnected from reality. This one fell into the second category. The mathematics troubled him before the implications did. 300 aircraft daily meant over 9,000 monthly, approaching 100,000 annually. That figure exceeded Japan's total aircraft production since beginning preparations for war in China 5 years earlier. It suggested American industry could manufacture in 12 months what had taken Japan half a decade. The strategic implications, if accurate, rendered Japan's entire war plan obsolete before the first year concluded. But the intelligence couldn't be accurate, not at those scales. The disconnect between claim and possibility was too vast. Japan's military leadership understood American industrial capacity in concrete terms. Admiral Yamamoto had studied at Harvard, served as naval attaché in Washington, traveled extensively through American industrial regions. He'd seen Detroit's automobile factories, Pittsburgh's steel mills, the shipyards along both coasts. His assessments, shared before the war, acknowledged American production potential exceeded Japan's by factors of 10 or more in raw materials, industrial infrastructure, and manufacturing capability. That assessment had factored into strategic planning. Japan couldn't match American industrial scale in extended conflict. The entire operational concept for the Pacific War recognized this limitation. Strike decisively at Pearl Harbor. Establish defensive perimeter across the Pacific. Secure resource zones in Southeast Asia. Force a negotiated settlement before American industrial mobilization reached full capacity. The plan required winning quickly, before the industrial imbalance materialized into deployed forces. But intelligence projections suggesting 300 aircraft daily implied the industrial imbalance was materializing faster than anyone had calculated. Much faster. If American factories actually achieved those production rates, the defensive perimeter strategy collapsed. Japan couldn't sustain aircraft losses at rates America could sustain production. The mathematics of attrition warfare turned completely unfavorable. Yet accepting the intelligence meant accepting that fundamental assumptions about industrial limitations were wrong. That modern warfare had entered scales beyond previous experience. That American industry could achieve production rates that seemed physically impossible given the complexity of aircraft manufacturing. The alternative explanation seemed more plausible. American propaganda inflated production claims to demoralize Japanese leadership and boost American public confidence. Roosevelt had made dramatic pronouncements about arsenal of democracy objectives. Newspapers published ambitious production targets. The intelligence reports might simply be repeating exaggerated American claims rather than verified production data. Senior officers receiving these intelligence assessments faced a choice: accept projections that invalidated strategic planning and suggested the war was already unwinnable, or dismiss the projections as propaganda-inflated estimates disconnected from manufacturing reality. Most chose dismissal. The pattern repeated through 1943. Intelligence reports described expanding American aircraft production, new factories, additional shifts, streamlined assembly processes. The monthly production estimates climbed steadily in intelligence summaries: 50,000 aircraft annually, then 60,000, approaching 70,000. And consistently, those estimates encountered skepticism at command levels where operational decisions materialized. Part of the skepticism stemmed from Japan's own industrial experience. Japanese aircraft manufacturers had struggled to increase production beyond established rates. Mitsubishi, Nakajima, Kawasaki, these companies represented the pinnacle of Japanese aviation engineering. They'd attempted to accelerate production through additional shifts, expanded facilities, improved processes. Results had been incremental, not transformational. If Japan's best manufacturers couldn't achieve revolutionary production increases, how could American companies, many new to aviation manufacturing, accomplish what established aviation firms found impossible? The skepticism also reflected cultural assumptions about industrial capability. Japanese doctrine emphasized quality over quantity, skilled craftsmen, precision manufacturing, continuous refinement. The Zero fighter embodied this philosophy: lightweight, maneuverable, lethal in the hands of experienced pilots. It achieved superiority through engineering excellence rather than numerical advantage. American industrial culture emphasized different values: mass production, standardization, quantity over refinement. That approach worked for automobiles and consumer goods, but aircraft represented an entirely different challenge. Aviation demanded tolerances that mass production couldn't achieve, quality control that assembly lines couldn't maintain, expertise that couldn't be compressed into abbreviated training. Or so the established doctrine insisted. But something was happening in American factories that doctrine didn't anticipate. By spring 1943, Japanese pilots began reporting encounter rates that didn't match expectations. More American aircraft over Guadalcanal than projections suggested possible. Replacement rates for downed American bombers that seemed impossibly rapid. Fighter numbers that continued growing despite combat losses. The operational data gradually diverged from what intelligence estimates had predicted. Not dramatically at first. A squadron here, an additional bomber group there. Small discrepancies that individually meant little but cumulatively suggested the intelligence projections might have been conservative rather than exaggerated. Naval operations staff began requesting updated production assessments. How many aircraft were Americans actually deploying? Where were these additional squadrons originating? What production rates would explain observed force levels? The revised intelligence came back with figures even higher than previous projections. American aircraft production had exceeded 60,000 in 1942. Projections for 1943 approached 85,000. The daily production rate across all American facilities now exceeded 300 aircraft, not as projection but as observed reality. 300 aircraft, every day, 24 hours, 7 days weekly. The numbers arrived in briefing rooms where officers planned operations against American forces. The intelligence demanded response. Either American production claims were accurate, or Japanese reconnaissance was systematically overestimating American strength across multiple theaters simultaneously. Neither explanation offered comfort. If production claims were accurate, Japan faced an attrition war it couldn't win. Every Japanese aircraft shot down represented a loss that couldn't be quickly replaced. Every American aircraft down was replaced within days by new production rolling off assembly lines an ocean away. If reconnaissance was overestimating American strength, then Japanese intelligence networks across the Pacific were failing systematically. Pilots were reporting aircraft that didn't exist. Observers were inflating numbers. The entire intelligence apparatus had become unreliable. Command preferred the second explanation. It preserved strategic planning assumptions. It suggested the war remained winnable if Japan maintained pressure. It avoided confronting the possibility that industrial capacity differences had created an insurmountable advantage. But the aircraft kept coming. By 1944, American air superiority had become undeniable across every theater. New aircraft types appeared frequently: improved fighters, heavier bombers, specialized variants. The production diversity suggested manufacturing capacity so excessive that American industry could afford specialized designs for specific missions, rather than adapting general-purpose aircraft across all roles. Japanese factories, meanwhile, struggled to maintain production of existing types. Material shortages, workforce depletion, Allied bombing disrupting transportation networks. Strategic bombing, conducted by aircraft manufactured at rates Japan couldn't match, targeted the industrial capacity Japan needed to sustain aircraft production. The feedback loop accelerated through 1944. American aircraft attacked Japanese industrial targets. Reduced Japanese production meant fewer defensive fighters. Fewer fighters meant American bombers faced diminishing opposition. The cycle compounded monthly. Intelligence assessments from late 1944 documented the full scale of American aircraft production. The final figures: 96,270 aircraft manufactured in 1944 alone. Peak monthly production of 9,000 aircraft in March. Daily production exceeding 300 aircraft sustained across multiple months. The projections that Tokyo had dismissed in 1942 as impossible propaganda had been conservative. American industry hadn't just met ambitious production targets, it had exceeded them. The 299 plane per day figure that seemed designed to demoralize had proven to be underestimate of actual American manufacturing achievement. Roosevelt had announced production goals in 1942 that military experts on both sides considered unrealistic. 60,000 aircraft in 1942, 125,000 in 1943. American factories had fallen short of those specific targets, but only slightly. Actual 1942 production reached 47,000. The 1943 total hit 85,000. By 1944, production had exceeded 96,000. American industry hadn't just matched ambitions. It had industrialized warfare at scales that rendered traditional military calculus obsolete. The question becomes, why couldn't Japan recognize and respond to this industrial reality when intelligence data arrived consistently through 1942 and 1943? Part of the answer involves institutional resistance to information that invalidates existing strategy. By late 1942, Japan was committed to the Pacific War. Reversing course required acknowledging the entire war plan was based on miscalculation. Authoritarian military structures resist such acknowledgement because it implies leadership error. Continuing forward, even into unfavorable conditions, often seems preferable to admitting strategic failure. Geography contributed to the intelligence failure as well. American industrial heartland operated thousands of miles from Japanese reconnaissance capability. Unlike European theaters where both sides could observe enemy production directly through aerial reconnaissance, Pacific War distances meant Japan relied on secondary intelligence sources. Agents in neutral countries, diplomatic reporting, intercepted communications. These sources provided data, but not the visceral reality of witnessing assembly lines operating continuously, factories stretching across horizons, supply chains coordinating thousands of components daily. Without direct observation, the data remained abstract, numbers on reports that could be questioned, reinterpreted, or dismissed as propaganda. Additionally, Japan's intelligence agencies operated in silos. The Army and Navy maintained separate intelligence organizations with minimal coordination. Army intelligence focused on ground force capabilities and resource production. Navy intelligence tracked fleet movements and naval aviation. Neither organization maintained comprehensive assessment of total American industrial capacity across all warfare categories. This organizational fragmentation meant no single agency compiled the complete picture. Army intelligence might note American aircraft production, but focus primarily on tank and artillery output. Navy intelligence tracked carrier-based aircraft, but paid less attention to strategic bombers. The systemic view, American industry mobilizing across all categories simultaneously at unprecedented scales, never coalesced into actionable intelligence that reached strategic decision-makers. Cultural factors played roles as well. Japanese military doctrine emphasized warrior spirit, tactical excellence, and individual courage as decisive factors in warfare. This doctrinal emphasis created cognitive framework that minimized material considerations. Superior spirit could overcome material disadvantage. Better training could defeat numerical superiority. The Zero's early dominance seemed to validate this philosophy. American military culture emphasized different values: industrial capacity, logistical superiority, material advantage. The American strategic approach assumed that wars between industrial nations were won by whichever side could produce more weapons, deliver more supplies, and sustain operations longer. Individual courage mattered, but systematic advantage decided outcomes. These different cultural frameworks created interpretation gap when evaluating intelligence. Japanese officers reviewing production data filtered it through doctrinal assumptions that minimized material factors. American production numbers seemed less threatening when doctrine insisted spirit overcame material disadvantage. Most fundamentally, Japan simply lacked the industrial capacity to respond even if leadership had fully accepted the intelligence. By 1943, Japan's industrial mobilization had reached maximum sustainable levels. Factories operated continuously. Resources flowed through optimized channels. Labor worked extended shifts. There was no reserve capacity to activate, no underutilized industrial base to mobilize. Even perfect intelligence couldn't change the structural reality. Japan's industrial capacity at full mobilization could not match American industrial capacity at similar mobilization. The resource base was too limited. The industrial infrastructure was too constrained. The geographic position was too disadvantageous. Japan entered the Pacific War aware of this industrial disadvantage. The entire strategic concept attempted to circumvent the industrial imbalance through rapid victory and negotiated settlement before American production materialized into deployed force. The intelligence failure wasn't recognizing American industrial capacity existed. The failure was underestimating how quickly that capacity could translate into overwhelming force projection. Japan's leadership calculated they had perhaps 2 years before American industrial advantage became decisive. In reality, they had less than one. By 1944, the war's outcome had become mathematical exercise. Japan lost aircraft faster than factories could replace them. America produced aircraft faster than Japan could destroy them. Training programs couldn't generate experienced pilots quickly enough to offset attrition. Industrial facilities couldn't increase output without resources that Allied interdiction denied. The war continued another year beyond the point where material calculation made the outcome certain. But the decisive factor had been American industrial achievement that seemed impossible until it materialized into overwhelming reality. When we consider the Pacific War, we tend to focus on dramatic battles. Midway, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima. These engagements represent the war's visible drama, courage under fire, tactical brilliance, strategic turning points. They make compelling history because they involve human elements we understand intuitively. But underneath those battles ran a different kind of warfare, quieter, less dramatic, ultimately more decisive. The war of factories and assembly lines, supply chains and production schedules, industrial systems competing across oceans. Japan entered this war with formidable military forces and tactical advantages, superior carrier doctrine, experienced naval aviators, advanced fighter aircraft, geographic position controlling resource zones. These advantages yielded spectacular early victories that confirmed doctrinal assumptions about warfare. But those advantages were expendable assets. Each experienced pilot lost was irreplaceable. Each carrier sunk took years to replace. Each aircraft down represented production capacity Japan couldn't easily restore. The war became a contest of which side could sustain losses while maintaining offensive pressure. American industrial mobilization answered that question decisively. By 1944, American factories were producing aircraft at rates that meant losing 100 aircraft in a single day's combat operations was strategically acceptable if it achieved objectives. Those 100 aircraft would be replaced by the next day's production. The replacement pilots were already in training pipelines that graduated thousands monthly. Japan couldn't absorb similar losses because there was no production surge to replace them. Each aircraft lost, each pilot killed, degraded overall capability in ways that compounded across months. The final accounting shows stark arithmetic. America produced approximately 300,000 military aircraft during World War II. Japan produced approximately 76,000. American production exceeded Japanese output by a factor of 4. In 1944 alone, the peak American production year, U.S. factories manufactured more aircraft than Japan produced during the entire war. This wasn't marginal advantage. This was categorical difference in industrial capability that made sustained warfare mathematically impossible for Japan once American production reached full capacity. The intelligence reports arriving in Tokyo in 1942 and 1943 attempted to communicate this reality. 300 aircraft daily, 9,000 monthly. Numbers that seemed like propaganda because they exceeded what established manufacturing doctrine suggested possible. But American industry had moved beyond established doctrine into something unprecedented: the full mobilization of the world's largest industrial economy entirely toward military production. Japan's leadership dismissed intelligence they couldn't accept because accepting it meant acknowledging the war was already lost. Better to continue fighting with hope that determination might overcome material disadvantage than to surrender to mathematical reality. When we ask what determined the Pacific War's outcome, the honest answer is less satisfying than stories of heroic battles and brilliant commanders. The war was decided in Seattle and Michigan, not Midway and Guadalcanal. It was decided by production engineers optimizing assembly lines, by logistics specialists coordinating supply chains, by industrial managers converting civilian factories to military production. Japan fought with courage and skill. Their forces demonstrated tactical excellence that Allied commanders respected and feared. But no amount of tactical superiority could overcome the fundamental industrial imbalance once American production reached sustainable high output. The intelligence was accurate. The projections were conservative. The impossible production rate of 299 aircraft daily was achieved, then exceeded, then sustained long enough to produce overwhelming numerical advantage that tactical excellence couldn't counter. Looking at this history, we might ask, what does it mean when wars between developed nations are decided by industrial capacity rather than battlefield courage or tactical brilliance? Does it suggest that future conflicts will similarly reduce to production contests? Or has modern warfare moved beyond even these scales into domains where different factors prove decisive? This video is based on historical records, expert analysis, and documented sources. Some interpretations are simplified for storytelling clarity.